Hi Marie!
Hi Jodi.
Have you recovered from our maths episode last month?
Well, the rash has faded,
Good,
but I'm
good.
about to get my own back on you, Jodi, because
Oh.
this episode is all about English.
Oh, I'll start itching now.
Yeah, you will. You'll be covered in hives by the end of it. Actually, that's not right because a little bird told me that you are actually really into reading.
It comes and it goes. I like stories, I like novels, I don't always like reading. So I have not read a book in about a year at this point, but I have got our producer's face is genuine shock at that. But in that time, I've probably listened to about 6 or 7 audiobooks.
Yeah, well,
So
that's the same to me.
I go through phases of reading. A big thing for me is I don't currently have a bath, therefore I'm not reading because I read
I'm
in
sorry,
the bath.
Jodi, can we just clarify that not that you don't currently have a bath, as in you do wash currently,
I have a
but
shower.
you don't have a bath. Yeah, okay.
I have a shower, Marie, don't worry.
It just sounded like you were saying you didn't wash.
It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from Beyond the Classroom with Marie and Jodi.
So, today we're educating Marie on the existence of showers and also looking at the transition from primary to secondary English, the positives and the pitfalls.
We're joined by Katie Rose from Twinkle. Katie is a primary practitioner with over 10 years' experience leading literacy at both a school and trust-wide level. She has experience in curriculum development and design, creation and delivery of CPD, innovative practice and assessment analysis. She's also been a Key Stage 2 moderator and a SATS marker. Welcome Katie.
Oh, thanks guys. It's really nice to see you all today.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the programme.
So, give me the basic idiot's guide to how is English taught at primary. Is it just reading? Is it reading and writing? How much grammar do they have to do? And what exactly is a fronted adverbial?
It's always the one that gets brought up front of adverbial. So obviously there's objectives in the national curriculum, position statements to cover. I think broadly you can split English in primary schools into your reading, writing, your punctuation, your SPAG style subjects. Reading obviously can be broken down into the comprehension and the fluency side. So starting off with phonics and that kind of really breaking down words to be decoded by learners in their early learning reading journeys. Onto that comprehension side, so understanding what they're reading and putting meaning behind it so they can really kind of understand author's intent and things like that. Same with writing. You've kind of got that balance between the transcription. Can children physically write? Have they got those fine and gross motor skills? Do they understand how letters are formed and how sentences look and paragraphs and things like that? And then moving on to that, again, the composition and the effect and using those fronted adverbials as we've already mentioned. But then alongside that, and I think this is a huge focus within primary settings, is the spelling, punctuation and grammar element, which, depending on the setting, can be quite discrete and separate or interwoven throughout. And really, it should be, because we want children to be able to use these fronted adverbials in lots of different ways. But they've got to be able to recognise them out of context because it is something that they're assessed on at the end of Key Stage 2. So it's quite heavy. And I've always found it quite interesting, the link between particularly SPAG from primary to secondary and where they go with that, because we cover it all. So where do they go then?
So just going back to the end of Key Stage 2 assessment, how much do you think SATs are the focus in Year 6? I know they're sort of not supposed to be.
Yeah, they're not supposed to. But we live in an age, don't we, where schools are assessed and you've kind of got that accountability. It reflects in progress scores, which then schools are judged on, and you look at it in area tables and things like that. So I think, unfortunately, they are a huge part. It depends on the context and the setting. You know, some schools, from the minute they walk in the Year 6 door, it will be a priority and there'll be boosters and there'll be SATs timetables and things like that. In others, it's trying to kind of keep the learning more holistic until kind of the SATs comes ahead. And Ofsted and the DfE are very clear that they don't want teaching to test. They don't want children to purely be writing and for assessment pieces. They don't want reading purely broken down into assessment strands. So we're not just looking at inference. We're not just looking at vocabulary. It's that more holistic approach. However, practitioners have to balance that with preparing children for tests, and that's an ongoing battle, which I'm assuming you have quite a lot of in secondary as well, balancing curriculum versus need.
The only end of the day, the only way to get rid of teaching to the test is by not having a test. Like, it's inevitable otherwise.
Yeah, and it's practitioner confidence, isn't it? Because if you know you are getting these children through their assessments at the end of the year, that will reflect to some extent on the provision that you're putting forward. If you aren't providing those opportunities for them to look at assessments and to write in particular ways that then can be assessed through moderation, you're almost setting yourself up for a fall, because you've not prepared them for what they need, and preparing yourself as well.
And the SATs is very stringently marked, isn't it, in terms of punctuation and things like that. If they get one thing wrong, they cannot get the mark for a question.
Yeah, it's quite a tricky one with regards to spelling, and that is almost assessed multiple times. So in the SPAG test itself, it's broken down into two parts. They have a 20-word spelling test, and then they have the kind of the PAG, the rest of it. But even within the PAG, you still have verb tenses. So maybe, for example, they might be asked to change catch into the past tense and spell it accurately. So, some children might know that it's caught, but might not be able to spell it, but then they get it wrong because it's spelling. So they're being assessed at the beginning in the spelling test. They're being assessed in the PAG bit of the test, but also in their writing pieces, which is not a test. It's a overview, moderation, judgment of the child's ability through different pieces, and it's conversation between the practitioner and the moderator. But still, spelling plays an emphasis in that. You have to be able to do the year 3-4 spellings, the year 5-6 spellings, and use them effectively and consistently, particularly if you're wanting to be at expected standard or at greater depth within the expected standard. So things like that, like I say, it is really stringent, and they're being assessed on it multiple times.
Yeah.
So if you have children that is an area of weakness, they're going to struggle on all elements, which can be really disheartening for them.
I'm sure it can, yeah. What do you do as a teacher in that situation? Say you've got somebody who's dyslexic and they struggle greatly with spelling. What on earth can you do to support them? It's
evidence. So trying to look at, you can, with writing, with the spelling test and the SPAG test, there isn't really anything you can do.
No.
It is as it is. But in the writing, as a teacher, you are making that professional judgment about what standards within the teacher assessment framework they meet. So it's collecting evidence of what you've put in place to support that. Is it a case of on a daily basis, these children do use adult support? Do they use dictionaries? Do they use thesauruses? But I think an interesting thing when I started doing my moderator training several years ago, it was the idea of if it's a particular weakness, there has to be evidence that it's been worked towards. So it's not just a case of, half this class is not very good at spelling.
Yeah.
So we're just going to ignore that. It's a particular need for that child. So it might not be a diagnosed need, but actually it might be something that's been apparent from when they started in early years. In their phonics, they didn't pass their phonics screen. There's been interventions in place, there's been support in place, you've got strategies around it. It's not just, they can't do it, so we didn't help them.
Yeah.
I think I definitely, when I was at school, you did have those kids, but they're just not very good at spelling, so don't worry about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
So it's about, is that quality teaching there, and is that support there? And if they still can't do it, you can ignore that particular statement for their specific needs. It's having that evidence.
Talked a lot about how you prepare kids for SATs. When they're done, what comes next? How do you prepare them for Key Stage 3 English and the secondary working environment?
Well, interestingly, once the SATs week is done, the Friday of SATs week is always when Year 6 schools know whether they're being moderated for writing. So 25% of the schools in the country will be carrying on very much formal kind of working and getting that evidence ready. And yeah, so it doesn't stop. It's kind of, well done for completing SATs. Here you go.
That's terrible.
Yeah, in every local authority, 25% of schools. So in theory, every 4 years, you'll be called to moderate. That changes depending on if you've got new staff in Year 6, new SLT, if you've had an Ofsted recently that possibly didn't go as well as you'd have hoped. You can be called more frequently. But it's that increasing formality of working a little bit, which is the expectation around SATs anyway, kind of getting them used to that independent working and, working in different ways. a lot of year 6 settings for English, and very much for other things as well, we'll do kind of project packs. So it's kind of bringing those skills together in that, kind of keeping them going, keeping purposeful learning alongside all the fun stuff. Like that tends to be when they have residentials, because schools will not take children out before the SATs, because that's a week of learning and it's a week of coverage, and all of that tends to wait. But often in that final term is when you get things like RSE, PHSE, so a lot of transition activities, getting ready, well-being, which feeds into all subjects, especially English. So yes, it's keeping that expectation going that learning is maintained, a lot of transition activities, but preparing those children to work in a different way through the tasks.
What do you think's the main differences between primary and secondary English?
I think it's possibly, my insight into secondary is purely through transition activities and kind of collaborating with transition leads. But once we were invited to take our greater depth writers up to secondary school to do some kind of like high ability writing, so, well, this for me is a brilliant opportunity to go and watch what they do. And what I feel like I observed was activities and not necessarily teaching. And I think that was possibly because of not knowing the expectation or the standard of what year 6 were coming up at, because several years ago when the curriculum changed, a lot of content got pushed down, and that SPAG content was really heavy and what you wanted to cover with them. And the lesson was brilliant. I watched this fabulous lesson about kind of using similes, personification, metaphors to describe an image, and it was great. Well, our higher ability children had already done this because of the content and the curriculum, and they were really great. So they didn't really need teaching as such. And I think that's what you find with a lot of children who are great at, higher ability or greater depth. They pick up things really quickly and run with it, and then they can personalize it and change it and put their own spin on it. I'd be really interested to see kind of how secondary teachers teach children who are struggling a little bit more in a way that we would do in primary. How does that transition? Because there's not as much input needed for greater depth children, because they get it and they go and they're ready for secondary. They want new challenges, they want new things. Whereas children who maybe struggle a little bit more and find things a bit trickier, I'd like to see how that is progressed through secondary, because my own understanding of that is very limited.
Yeah. And I'd like to say there's this X, Y, and Z, but it does really vary by school.
Yeah,
and our impression certainly as a secondary English teacher, my impression when you get pupils in at year 7 is that they know a lot about the mechanics of English and the construction of English, but they struggle more with the creativity and the playing with the language and not being so structured and so within the rules. And they often go, "Miss, you put that comma in the wrong place," when you put things on the board, and you're like, you know what, punctuation sometimes is just personal choice, and they really struggle to get their heads around that because they've been told these hard and fast rules. And one of the things I was worked at was just letting them let go of that and just enjoy. But because we don't have that structured teaching of SPAG as much as they do in primary, I think the pupils that struggle can get lost in that sometimes, because they need that.
And that makes complete sense when you look at the writing framework, which is not the SPAG test. More than half of the statements are SPAG related. They are punctuation, they are spelling, they are all of those kinds of things. I've seen SPAG tests being sent back where, for example, they put in inverted commas, and they've clearly put them in the right way, but they were facing the wrong way, so they didn't get marked. And I get it, it's not 100% accurate, I understand that. That child knows how to use inverted commas because they're in the right place. So that's going from that rigidity of practice and that expectation that they have to get it right. It does limit our ability to
of course
create it.
I can understand that.
For composition and effect, it's a real balance, and it really, at the heart of kind of your writing provision, it takes a strong subject lead to be able to go, we are going to focus on this is what we're going to do for our children in our setting. And balancing those expectations, it is really difficult, so I'm not surprised at all.
And we sort of feel like they write with a sort of checklist in their mind. I've got to include a simile, I've got to include a metaphor, make sure I've got some good adjectives in there, and actually the GCSE is marked quite differently. There is a huge amount of marks for content and ideas and a small amount of marks for SPAG. So our focus is more on writing style, ideas, structure as well, structuring a story or whatever the writing may be. And when you I marked GCSE for a lot of years. When you mark in the writing, you know, when I'm teaching, pupils will say, well, I've put a semicolon in, would I get a mark for that? And I'm like, it doesn't work like that. I know it says a variety of punctuation. That does not mean you have to use every single punctuation mark. It has to be what's appropriate for the writing. And I think sometimes it's safer if you've got a checklist, because you can think, yeah, I've done all that, I've covered it.
Yeah, but it's...
Whereas we're trying to teach something that's much more vague in a way, and harder to get a handle on.
It sounds like these two exams are just written by two sets of people that have never spoken to each other in the history of their lives. Is that about accurate? Okay.
Probably. At one point, it was my understanding that there was going to be a Key Stage 3 SPAG curriculum written.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't happen.
No, we haven't got one.
Yeah, that was almost the kind of selling point for it in Key Stage 2, because when it first came into play, I was an English leader in an individual school, really, really passionate about it, but quite new to role. And in the local authority, they employed someone from an A-level setting to come and teach the primary practitioners about the terminology. You know, when we're looking at things like subjunctive mood, why on earth, you know, what? This is not what we've been doing. This is not how we've been teaching our children. So how do we need to feel comfortable to do it, to deliver it to the children? And the selling point was very much, yes, it will carry on in secondary. And that didn't happen.
No.
So it's been that balancing act again, trying to get a love of writing. And we know that nationally, writing enjoyment is reducing, you know, and people don't write with pleasure because we don't necessarily encourage it in the way that we're putting it across. And it's very difficult. And I think that's something that we're at risk of losing in the way that we were at risk of losing it with reading until the reading framework re-emphasised, you know, not just reading to read, reading for passion and reading for culture and things like that.
And then of course in Key Stage 3 now we're expected to teach phonics to help the struggling readers, which is something I'm working on at the moment.
Huge shift for Key Stage 3, absolutely.
So that's a massive change, because it's a bit like you were saying, all of a sudden you think, what, we've never done this before.
It's really interesting, because it seems to be like stuff is coming from the bottom up, whereas in maths it kind of just all happened, like mastery, kind of people started introducing mastery in secondary before they did in primary, although it's stuck a bit better in primary, but kind of everyone just got obsessed with it all at the same time. And kind of, do you have so there's certain scheme of works that you can buy into or free online that run from reception maths all the way through to GCSE maths? Is there similar stuff like that for English, or is it just not?
Yeah, it does. I mean, Twinkle got some fabulous different schemes of work and lots of things in development that encourage and include kind of the reading and the writing and the spelling and the phonics, you know, so everything can be brought in holistically and together. And there's lots of different things out there, but it depends on the school and the subject leader to be able to go back from my context. This is what we struggle with. Potentially, it might be composition and effect. So we need to think about how we can include that in all different aspects. Do we want to go down a kind of a book study approach where we use a core text to stimulate writing and feed it all in? But then it's the choice of that text. It's making sure it's useful and not just kind of, oh well, we could write a newspaper report. It's got to be applicable and useful, and the children have the right vocabulary and terminology and knowledge to be able to write certain things. So there are things out there, but it's all very much guidance, not this is what you have to do.
You know, in primary, because you teaching more than one subject, like in the same environment, do you find that the English knowledge, like the SPAG knowledge and the structure knowledge, passes on to the other subjects? Because one of the things we find in secondary is that students do it in English and then they'll go to geography and write a piece of extended writing and just it all flies out the window.
It's the aim, it's the ideal, and again that's to do with your curriculum provision and your planning and seeing where you can make these transferable skills and links. But what you've got to be very careful of, and particularly highlighted in various Ofsted subject reviews, is that if you are in a history lesson and you are teaching about, say, chronology, the focus is chronology, not chronology plus can I get in a fronted adverbial, just to bring that back. It may apply, but you're not teaching them to use fronted adverbials in that lesson. That's an addition, or that's transferring those skills. So it can be really difficult, and that's to do with kind of real curriculum planning and working together as a team to think where things fit best, really.
So one last question from me: when does it stop being literacy, start being English, and then when does it stop being English and start being English literature and English language?
Again, it's one that always confuses me, because at one point I was a literacy lead and then I was an English lead, and I think we used to have the literacy hour, and that's because it was everything. Kind of within that literacy hour, it was everything, whereas now we break it down into your reading, your writing, your phonics, so it's different terminologies. But the language and the literature, again, it depends on individual school preferences. Do you teach your English language through your literature, as in having that book study approach, or do you do it quite separate? Your reading is a separate element, and then your writing might be a particular focus. And it depends on what needs covering, and where your children's strengths are, and where your practitioner's strengths are as well. So individual schools have individual preferences, I think, with that one.
So what could we do to make this transition better from primary to secondary? What do you think we could do to make that work?
I think it's conversations. The most comfortable I've ever felt with the transition is when we've had that really good relationship. Not an email sent to the Key Stage 3 link and going, right, this child's good at this child's good at this. Sitting down, having those conversations, and working collaboratively, rather than just here's some Key Stage 2 work, here you go, Key Stage 3 people, have a look at it, or Key Stage 3 saying this is what we do, have a look at that. Working together and understanding that why. I'm a massive fan that no matter what you do in life, it has to lead with why, and not just this is what we do, because we are not trained in your curriculum, you're not trained in our curriculum. We have to understand it. So I think that's a massive thing, encouraging that collaborative practice, working and sharing for the best outcomes of the children, because fundamentally that's why we're all here, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree totally.
What's on your mind? Let us know your thoughts, ideas and anecdotes. Drop us a line at beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk.
Thank you so much for joining us, Katie. It's been genuinely fascinating to talk English.
Oh, no worries. It's been a pleasure.
You've liked talking English, Jodi? I'm converting you.
Yeah, it's never going to happen. I found it interesting. You enjoyed the maths one a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
If you do want to go back and listen to that episode on maths transition, just have a look back in our feed, and don't forget to like and subscribe and all those other things so that you are told about future episodes. If there's a topic you want to discuss, just drop us an email at beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk.
And don't forget, Twinkle is without an E.
Marie, I do have a confession though. I still don't really know what a fronted adverbial is.
To be honest, Jodi, neither do I really. I sort of think I know what it is, but I'm not confident that I do 100%.
This podcast is proudly produced by Beyond. Please bear in mind the views and opinions expressed are those of individuals and may not represent those of Beyond or Twinkle.